This is my remote viewing session on Jon Benet Ramsey. So when I first zoomed in, I looked like I was closed off, like in a space below ground that was like sealed off from external light. And there were these symbols present. There's a triangular, and then a circle around it, which could be possible ritualistic or symbolic intent. And then there was like a metallic surface. It was like cold, reflective, and it was like a functional thing. There were some kind of tools that feel like very precision oriented, not like haphazardly just put there, like they were chosen deliberately for specific use. There was also a cloth or a fabric that was like a very soft texture that was draped by, and that was later like used as a covering. There's a significant emotional imprint of like fear that was there, confusion, and then a sense of like surrender. The location has been used repeatedly, possible not necessarily for this, but possibly for secretive or controlled actions. And there's a presence of multiple individuals, at least 3 or 4, and their energy feels highly focused. But there's one figure that dominates, and he has a very strong, decisive personality with intent. So he's a male figure, he's older, he has like a very commanding presence, very tall, like not very tall, but he stands very, very tall and very authoritative. And he's connected to a larger network of power or influence. This individual has pronounced an angular facial structure, high cheekbones, and a slightly squared jawline, and a prominent chin, which suggests like a commanding and deliberate appearance, right? His forehead is like broad, and it's got like lines here, which is indicative of age and experience. Late 50s, early 60s. His eyes are kind of deep set, but they have like this calculating gaze. They're kind of light in color, maybe blue or like a grayish color, but they give off an impression of like intensity and focus. His nose is straight and kind of prominent, but not super prominent, but it's like well proportioned. The mouth is like thin lips, and they're like very tightly held always, so he's kind of reserved and guarded. His hair was graying. It was like very gray, like a little bit of salt and pepper maybe, but then he had like patches here where the hair is like missing and goes back, and it's like neatly groomed, and there's, like I said, thinning here. He's about 5'10" to 6 feet tall, about like 190 to 210 pounds. He's like lean but not muscular. Could have been overweight at one time. He has like long fingers and like well manicured nails, and he has like a steady demeanor. He has like a little bit of sun damage and signs of aging, right? As is usually the case with somebody at that age. But there's these 2 marks right here that are very significant. And then there's a faint scar near one temple, like just above the eyebrow, that could suggest it was like an injury of some sort. But this guy feels like he's tied to a very powerful organization, and his energy carries the weight of responsibility, but also secrecy. And he appears connected to aerospace, defense, or classified projects. So you guys can see where I'm going with this. If you look up Norman Augustine, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, 1996. Now, I'm not saying it's him, but it looks very similar. So there was at least 3 others that are present. 2 appear to be like subordinate, like just robot kind of people, while the other feels like an observer, like almost like he's documenting or recording events. But the person that was documenting, it feels like he's not sure. He's like, why am I doing this, right? And it feels like there's power tied to government or corporate interests with access to classified or experimental knowledge. Well-trained, like they carry out their tasks without question. These other ones, they're very complicit, or they're coerced into participation, one of the 2, but it feels like they're complicit, at least 2 of them. The observer recorder, like I said, he feels like morally conflicted about it. Could this be Fleet? Could this be the Fleet white guy? I don't know. There's also this weird object present. Its design is intricate and it's unfamiliar. It seems like advanced technology of some sort, or experimental technology. It has this faint vibrating or hum, like as if it's active or alive, but I didn't really feel like it was alive. There's also papers or documents that are being like reviewed, almost like they're like studying something or like reciting something that has like codes on it. And this is all so highly confidential. I couldn't even make it up, but I felt like there was like codes on it. So it feels very premeditated. These tools were well prepared in advance, and there was a sense of a ritualistic process, actions being done with intention in order to get something out of it, right? So then I see a young individual, or a vulnerable presence is brought into the space. She appears to be like unaware of the full extent of what's happening, but then she feels scared and fear, and then she gets subdued. Then the event seems to like escalate to the symbolic or like a performance almost like its meaning is obscured to outsiders. It's like a ritual, right? And then the individual's bound. Then what happens afterwards, there's a strong sense of like erasing everything. Everything's like meticulously cleaned or removed to avoid detection. But there's this lingering energy of like secrecy, guilt, fear, as though those involved knew that they had to conceal what had occurred because it was so big, right? But there is a sense of coolness as though the location is like temperature controlled or lacks like sunlight coming in, right? So that could be the basement. That makes sense to me. In a ritualistic killing context, the triangle that I saw could represent the act of sacrifice as a means of like spiritual elevation or communicating with higher powers, or what they believe to be their higher powers, right? Not our higher powers. But then the circle within the triangle adds an additional symbolism, which means like wholeness or eternity. But it also symbolizes like completeness and like the cycle of life and death. It also the circle creates a sacred ritual space. And they use this in ritual space to bound where rituals are performed, right? And the placement of the circle at the apex of the triangle could symbolize an offering or a sacrifice that is intended to connect with some kind of force, right? These radiating lines that came from the base, there's 3 of them, can signify, and they usually do signify energy or power. The lines, to me, suggested like a dispersion of energy emanating from the base, signifying like the release of life force energy through this act, right? So the sacrifice for ascension, right? The triangle and the circle suggest that movement from the physical, the base of the triangle, to the spiritual, the apex of the circle, in a ritualistic offing. This could mean using the act as like a medium to release energy or to gain favor with these individuals. So, and then like I said, the lines is like radiating that life force from the sacrifice intended to like reach these entities or beings or whatever. My analysis is like the 3-page note, the ransom note is like performance or storytelling. Nobody writes a 3-page ransom note. It's not like practical communication, right? The length itself pretty much implies that it was part of like a staged process. There's also a lot of weird symbolic meaning in it, like victory, like to imply dominance or success in the ritual or the completion of this symbolic act. Now they do SBTC. So this remains unexplained, but the acronym could be tied to like ritualistic or esoteric meanings. The one I got was Sacred Blood to Covenant. So this phrase could imply a deeper purpose beyond like a financial ransom. And in fact, to me, it doesn't suggest ransom at all, but linked to spiritual goals. And the ransom demand matches Jon Benet Ramsey's Christmas bonus, $118,000, suggesting these people had intimate knowledge of the family's finances. But there's also a biblical connection. Psalm 118 is about divine protection, trust, and overcoming obstacles. So this could tie into the victory phrasing, especially if the perpetrators held some religious or ritualistic beliefs. You know how that can get twisted, right? So the reference to a foreign faction, which they say was like a group involved, it hints at like a secret organization within an organization, almost like a cult-like practice. So the crime occurred on Christmas evening, which is a time with a significant religious and symbolic meaning and opens portals anyways. And ritualistic offings often align with certain important dates. Christmas has connections to both Christianity and paganism, so I think that was significant. So the persons of interest, Jon Benet Ramsey and Fleet White, are the ones who searched the basement. And then John opened a latch door to the windowless room and found Jon Benet there. He carried her upstairs. Like, this totally contaminated the scene. I mean, stupid. That's like 101. And then the lack of questioning. Like, Patsy Ramsey never questioned Fleet White's actions during the time. She just said, oh, I don't know what happened. Or, I don't know what he said. And I don't know why he did that. Which is bizarre anyways, because when she was interviewed, she said, oh, I didn't know what he was saying to my husband. I didn't ask him any questions. I'm sorry, if my daughter had been off and this man came in saying, I'm going to have to tell my story, I'd be like, what story? What are you talking about? And so I did some analysis with AI, and I gave it all the evidence and asked it to give me the statistical probability that the father was involved, and it gave me 40%. The statistical probability that the mother having an awareness of what happened but not being involved was 72%, which is really high. So I think that's pretty indicative of the fact that she knew something went down. But the statistical evidence that Lockheed Martin and the father were directly involved in a ritualistic offing was 41%. Now, we all know Lockheed Martin is involved in research and reverse engineering alien crafts and technology when this happened in 1996. And my guides are telling me that they had not yet made like direct contact. Like they may have recovered a non-human intelligence, but they didn't know how to communicate with them, right? So they knew that they were around, and they were attempting to like gain favor with these entities because possibly they didn't know what their intentions were and they wanted to get on their good side. So Lockheed Martin's role in contracts with agencies like DARPA, Department of Defense, and possibly Majestic 12, which is a very secretive government group managing UFO-related projects, further supports the likelihood of awareness of this. So in 1996, there wasn't really evidence that there was active communications with these beings because they couldn't really decipher what the non-human languages or their symbolisms or their intentions or consciousness, right? So that was a monumental challenge for them. But Lockheed Martin's focus would have likely been one of two things: extracting technology from them and to gain advantage, and the understanding of this, how to use these things, and then also figuring out if they were threats or whatever by communicating with them, right? So if their attempts to communicate with them failed, they might have thought that this would be the way to go about doing things, which is completely ridiculous, but, people don't make a lot of sense sometimes. And this would be based on the assumptions that advanced beings might recognize or respond to a symbolic or intentional gesture of that energetic capacity, right? And when I analyze the statistic probability that the mother knew what had happened and was covering for both her husband and Lockheed Martin, AI gave me a 50% likelihood. So Lockheed Martin's involvement in it is not too far outside the realm of possibility either, because they have had a Mississippi plant shooting in 2003 where an employee of Lockheed Martin went to a plant in Meridian, Mississippi and carried out a mass shooting resulting in 6 deaths before the perpetrator finally took his own life. They're involved in many briberies and scandals. In 1970, Lockheed was involved in an international bribery scandal in Japan where company officials were found to have bribed foreign officials to secure contracts. And a lot of false claims settlements in 2012 too. The company agreed to a $15 million settlement with the U.S. government to resolve allegations of overbilling for tools used in military aircraft, right? And then also in 1996, a guy named John Peake, who was an IT worker at Lockheed Martin in Marietta, he was involved in the murders of his common-law wife, Carol Marlin, and her friend, Margaret Jen. And then in 2005, he murdered his estranged wife, Casey Peake. So I don't know what you guys get from this, but I did an independent. I had no idea about Lockheed Martin or anything like this. This was so bizarre when this came through, but I definitely, after remote viewing this, see a direct correlation. I will leave the remote viewing targets in the comment section, and so you can remote view and see what you guys get.